Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started.
Gravitas, co-presented by
SBI Mutual Fund, a partner for life.
Chemistry That Matters, SABIC. Skoda Superb, best in next class. Co-powered by Star Health Insurance, the health insurance specialist.
There was a time when kings conquered territories through force. Then they used commerce. The nation states were formed, and now a country is using the combination of all of these, commerce and military force, to occupy foreign lands. The country in question is China, and tonight we'll tell you how China is engineering a silent takeover of foreign governments. Let me give you some examples. A lawmaker in Australia was suspended for taking favors from the Chinese state. An intelligence report in Germany was quashed. It exposed China's influence on the German government. A deepening debt crisis in Sri Lanka as it continues to borrow Chinese money. These are different stories, but they're all part of one pattern. China's effort to take control through various means of foreign powers and foreign markets. On Gravitas, we'll bring you the data and also discuss what the world is doing to stop China's colonial march. Also on the show tonight, India has rejected the proposal for a large-scale phase 3 trial of the Russian vaccine. What does it mean for Sputnik V? And also, where is India in the vaccine race? We'll bring you a special report. The vice presidential debate is done. It was Mike Pence versus Kamala Harris. Who won? The fly on Pence's head. We'll explain. Argentina has become the first country to approve genetically modified wheat. Regulatory hurdle crossed. What about market barriers? Is GM wheat the future? We'll discuss that. And Australia's new visa rules have triggered a row. Partner visa won't be granted to those who cannot speak English. Why is this a problem? We'll tell you. But first, as always, Gravitas Global Headlines.
The World Bank has estimated India's GDP to plunge 9.6% in 2020-21, sharper than its June forecast of 3.2% contraction. The latest assessment reflects the impact of the coronavirus lockdown and the income shock experienced by household and small urban service firms. The former U.S. police officer Derek Chauvin, charged with the murder of the unarmed black man George Floyd, has been released from prison on bail. Chauvin has posted a $1 million bond. Clashes broke out between hundreds of Golden Dawn supporters and the police as the far-right party, once the third largest political force in Greece, was declared a criminal organization by the Athens Appeals Court. The chairman of Afghanistan's High Council for National Reconciliation, Dr. Abdullah Abdullah, called on Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and briefed him about the intra-Afghan talks between the Afghan government and Taliban underway in Doha, and thanked New Delhi for its principled position on the Afghan peace process. Taiwan's foreign ministry has asked the Chinese mission to get lost in a response to the Chinese wolf warrior diplomacy aimed at bullying Indian media into not covering Taiwan's National Day celebrations. Alphabet Inc.'s Google is facing a new antitrust case in India in which the US tech giant is alleged to have abused its Android operating system's position in the smart television market. The case is Google's fourth major antitrust challenge in India, one of its key markets. Google is currently facing public criticism from Indian startups for enforcing certain policies and company charges that hurt their growth. A suspected toxic spill along a beach on Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula has killed 95% of marine life on the surrounding seabed, following a weeks-long campaign to investigate the mysterious incident. Local surfers were the first to spot that something was wrong at Kalaktir Beach after about 20 people in a surf camp experienced severe retina burns and symptoms similar to food poisoning. India's Ministry of External Affairs has responded to Chinese mission's statement on WION's special broadcast on China. The Indian government has said that media is free in India, which reports on issues as it sees fit. The Chinese mission had termed WION broadcast a violation of One China policy. 19-year-old Iga Swiatek has reached her first Grand Slam final after easing past Argentina's Nadia Podoroska in the French Open. Podoroska had become the first qualifier in the Open era to reach the semis at Roland Garros, but her fairy-tale run was ended emphatically in a 2-6, 1-6 defeat to the pole. World number 54 Swiatek stunned top seed Simona Halep in the fourth round and is yet to drop a set at the tournament. She will take on Australian Open champion Sofia Kenin or 7th seed Petra Kvitova in the title clash. World champions France inflicted a record 7-1 defeat on Ukraine in a friendly, as Olivier Giroud became the country's second highest goal scorer of all time. The Chelsea forward marked his 100th cap for France with a brace, taking his international tally to 42 goals, which surpasses Michael Platini and is 9 shy of Thierry Henry's record. 17-year-old Eduardo Camavinga, Corentin Tolisso, Kylian Mbappe and Ant Griezmann were also on target for France. Elsewhere, Germany squandered a lead for the third match in a row as they were held to a 3-all draw by Turkey.
What does colonization in the 21st century look like? Let me give you some telltale signs. Predatory lending, land grab, a disregard for the rule of law, and expansionism. Does this remind you of a country? This is the playbook of modern-day China, a country that uses commerce, globalization, and checkbooks to execute a silent takeover of governments. Case in point, Germany. It's a democratic country that seems to have suffered a major intelligence failure. A new report is out. It claims that a high-ranking German official suppressed a sensitive intelligence report. Why? Because they feared this report could damage German business ties with China. What did the report say? It said China was trying to influence every level of the German government, society, and business. The report criticized the intimate ties between German businesses and the Chinese government. But before the information could be made public, a high-ranking official intervened. This report was supposed to be distributed widely within the German government, but that did not happen. It only reached a handful: German Chancellor Angela Merkel and a few others. The German government has not issued a response to these disclosures. They say the government does not comment on the findings of intelligence services. But this report has left the Merkel government red-faced. It is not the first time that Germany has come under scrutiny for its relationship with China. Let's show you a report from last month. It's a summary of views from European Union trade officials, senior diplomats and experts, and they all believe that Germany does not want to upset the relationship because it could lose access to one of the largest export markets in the world. And this is a weakness that leaves not just Germany but the entire European Union vulnerable. The EU itself has been embarrassed twice because of China this year alone. Its foreign policy branch faced humiliation for concessions to Beijing. First, it softened a report on Chinese disinformation during the pandemic, and then Beijing censored an op-ed that said China is the original hotspot of the Wuhan virus outbreak. A top diplomat of the European Union allowed China's state mouthpiece to delete this line, the one that you see on your screen. It was deleted. So why is Europe putting up with all of this? China is being a bully and Europe a mute sufferer. In the month of February, China threatened to harm Czech companies if a lawmaker went ahead with a planned visit to Taiwan. Reports say the Chinese embassy in Prague crafted a letter for the president's office. It suggested that European companies like Volkswagen, Skoda, or Lender Home Credit Group would quote-unquote suffer if the lawmaker visited Taiwan. Allow me to quote from this letter. Czech companies which have economic interests in China will have to pay for the visit to Taiwan by Chairman Kubera. The Chinese are referring to Yaroslav Kubera, the lawmaker who died unexpectedly before his trip to Taiwan. What message is Beijing trying to send here? Especially to countries that do business with China. The Communist Party is weaponizing trade. It says it will, or it is trying to project that it will punish partners, use economic retaliation if it does not have its way. Another Chinese diplomat made a similar threat to the German government. This was when Merkel was mulling a ban on Huawei. The Chinese ambassador to Germany said, and I'm quoting again, if Germany were to make a decision that led to Huawei's exclusion from the German market, there will be consequences. The Chinese government will not stand idly by. This is what the ambassador said. How do you think Germany responded? It buckled. China's threat worked. Germany has resisted a sweeping ban on Huawei. China wants to dictate the policies of foreign governments, and Beijing's campaign goes beyond Europe. Last month in Australia, a lawmaker was suspended from his party. Shaukat Mosalman had praised Chinese President Xi Jinping's response to the Wuhan virus outbreak. Later, it emerged that this man had taken 9 privately funded trips to China. This was after he was elected to office. Reports say some records show that the Chinese government often paid transportation and hospitality costs for him. And now he's under investigation. So this is what it comes down to. China is using its economic muscle to bend both individuals and governments to its will. And that is the threat posed by over-dependence on China. It gives Beijing the upper hand, the power to extract concessions. First, China used the carrot of market access to lure Western companies, and now it is weaponizing the same access to silently take over governments. Sri Lanka too is struggling to shake off Chinese influence, but it's only sinking deeper into Chinese debt. Colombo's foreign reserves are dwindling. Today, a Chinese delegation led by a top member of the Communist Party swooped in to help. Our next report tells you more.
The world knows little about Yang Jiechi, but when his name appears in Chinese press releases, China means business. Yang is widely considered as the highest-ranking diplomat in the Communist Party. He is leading a delegation-level visit to Colombo, and that too in the middle of the pandemic. What was the urgency? Colombo wants more money. Sri Lanka faces serious economic challenges. Ratings agency Moody's has downgraded Sri Lanka's credit rating by 2 notches. The rating, CAA -1, means the credit risk is very high. Colombo is expecting help from China. It wants the second tranche of a $1.2 billion syndicated Chinese loan. Colombo has received the first tranche of $500 million in March. The pandemic has hit Sri Lanka hard. Its foreign reserves are dwindling. As of May this year, Sri Lankan President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has reached out to Beijing twice for help. First, China gave Sri Lanka an urgent loan of $500 million. According to reports, these funds were for the fight against the Wuhan virus. Then, Sri Lankan lawmakers approved a decision to borrow $80 million more from the China Development Bank. This money was for the road projects. The International Monetary Fund estimates that by the end of this year, Sri Lanka's net government borrowing will rise to 9.4% of its GDP. There is a hole in the Sri Lankan government's budget, and Colombo is taking more money from Beijing to fill it. Sri Lanka has a huge debt bill for this year. According to a report, Colombo must repay $4.8 billion. Sri Lanka owes a large chunk of this to China. The pandemic has hit government revenues. There is a possibility that Sri Lanka might fall short. By 2018, Sri Lanka owed about $5 billion to China. In 2017, China wrote off $1.1 billion worth of debt in exchange for the right to the Hambantota port for a 99-year lease. The same port that has now become a symbol of the Chinese debt trap. With the Hambantota port deal, Colombo effectively conceded a part of its sovereign territory to China in exchange for debt relief. But the relief didn't last long. A year later, Sri Lanka borrowed $1 billion again for 8 years. By last year, China accounted for 15%.
Try and bring you that report, but we can tell you that not everyone is bowing to China. The United Kingdom, for instance. Today, the British Parliament's Defence Committee came out with a report. And they have found, quote-unquote, clear evidence of collusion between Huawei and the Chinese Communist Party. This report drives another nail into Huawei's coffin in the UK. Earlier, the British government had already made plans to phase out Huawei by 2027. Now, based on this report, the UK may have to remove the equipment earlier than planned. So what does the report say? It cites a venture capitalist, a man who claimed that the Chinese government financed the growth of Huawei with $75 billion in the last 3 years, $75 billion of government money for a private company. This cash injection allowed Huawei to sell its equipment at a quote-unquote ridiculously low price. The report also mentions a claim by a researcher. It says that Huawei has engaged in a variety of, and I'm quoting again, intelligence, security and intellectual property activities. In the end, the lawmakers concluded that Huawei has strong links to the Communist Party and the Chinese state. None of this is news, really. But the fact that it's coming as a part of an official report is significant. The UK may phase out Huawei. What about India? Will Huawei continue to be part of India's 5G rollout? India wants to reduce its dependence on Chinese tech companies. And while there's no official decoupling from Huawei, multiple other efforts are on, like what happened yesterday. India and Japan have finalized an ambitious agreement on cyber security. This will boost India's cooperation with Japan on 5G and critical information infrastructure. The deal was finalized during External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar's visit to Tokyo. He was there for the Quad meeting, the alliance between India, Japan, Australia and the US. Now, a day after that Quad engagement, Jaishankar met Japan's foreign minister. Remember, Japan recently had a leadership change with Shinzo Abe making way for Yoshihide Suga as Prime Minister. The government of Japan remains committed to strong ties with India.
Under the new administration of Prime Minister Suga, there is no change that we will retain a strong emphasis on strategic ties with India. I'd like to continue aligning with Foreign Minister Jaishankar to further enhance the Japan-India special strategic and global partnership.
So India and Japan will collaborate on 5G. Does that mean Huawei is out? Will India ban Huawei? The government of India still does not have a clear position on the question of Huawei. Australia, Japan, the US, the UK and Taiwan have all banned this company. Huawei clearly has links with the Chinese government. It poses serious security threats. While India has not officially barred it, reports say the government is quietly sidelining Chinese tech giants, including this one. State-owned telecom companies have apparently been asked to keep Chinese equipment out of their network. Another report in August said that Indian officials are quietly pushing out Huawei from Indian networks. But as of today, it is still going to be part of 5G trials. So here's what we say. India took a position when it banned more than 100 Chinese apps. Huawei may not be easy given its vast presence in the country, but it should not be treated any differently. New Delhi should make its curb on Huawei official and take a stand against China's neo-colonialism. Now, Russia's bid to win the vaccine race has hit a hurdle in India. Authorities in Delhi have denied permission for a large-scale clinical trial of the Russian vaccine Sputnik V. They say there is simply not enough data to ensure the safety of trial volunteers. It's a worry that has been expressed by scientists around the world. Our next report tells you what lies ahead for this Russian vaccine.
India's drug regulatory body has dealt a major blow to Russia's Sputnik V vaccine. It has rejected a proposal for large-scale clinical trials of the shot. The reason? A lack of sufficient data. An expert panel has voiced concerns about Sputnik V trials that are presently underway. Their worry is that the sample size is too small. Plus, there is no data available on Indian participants. This is not the first time Sputnik V's safety credentials have been questioned. Scientists have been critical of Russia's fast-tracked approval, with some calling it reckless and worrying. Despite the criticism, Russia has not slowed down. It plans to produce 1 billion doses of Sputnik V in 5 countries. That too before concluding phase 3 trials. 20 countries, including India, have expressed interest in the vaccine. Last month, Dr. Reddy's laboratories tied up with the Russian Sovereign Fund, which is marketing Sputnik V. The partnership covers clinical trials and vaccine distribution. India has been promised 100 million doses of Sputnik V. But the move to block phase 3 trials is a huge setback. The message from Indian regulators is clear. Start small. Dr. Reddy's has been asked to test out the vaccine in a smaller trial, possibly a phase 2 before beginning large-scale studies. So what next for Sputnik V? In Russia, phase 3 trials are proceeding as planned. 40,000 volunteers are involved. The preliminary results are encouraging. But the worry is the lack of diversity in the volunteer pool. Here in India, the vaccine will have to go through the motions. A smaller trial to ascertain safety, followed by a larger phase 3 trial. 3 vaccine candidates are currently under trial in India. AstraZeneca has partnered with Pune-based Serum Institute. They are currently in phase 2 and 3 of clinical trials. India's homegrown candidate, developed by Bharat Biotech and ICMR, is currently in phase 2. So is the vaccine developed by Zydus Cadila. Regulatory approval in India is crucial for all vaccine candidates. There are 2 reasons for this. 1. India is a vaccine manufacturing hub. It produces more than 3 billion shots every year. And 2. India is leading the world in average daily caseload. Higher the incidence of COVID-19, higher the demand for vaccines. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
A lot is being said about a proposed Australian law. It's got to do with migration, immigration in Australia's context. Australia wants foreign spouses of existing residents to know basic English. It wants spouses to pass an English test when applying for immigration to Australia. This requirement has not been approved by the Parliament yet. If it gets the nod, it will be applicable from mid-2021. Now, critics say this move is racist and has been designed to keep non-Westerners out of Australia. Let me give you the other side of the debate, and I'll begin with a question. Say you were relocating to a country to join your spouse or family. Would you want to be employable there? Or at least have a functional knowledge of the local language? Maybe just enough to say a hello, or a thank you, or seek help. What Australia is asking for is not for an applicant to write Shakespearean prose or Keatsian poetry. It is asking for functional English, beginner's level English. And if it goes ahead with the law, it will not be an exception. Let's come back to Germany. Foreign nationals living in Germany are expected to demonstrate competency in the German language. The government website puts it out there in clear words. It says, and I'm quoting, "To be able to live in Germany, you will need to know German. You need to take a language test." Here's what the German government says. "To be allowed to immigrate to Germany, you will need to enter the exams and pass them to either A1 or B1. What if a child is seeking immigration to unite with his or her parents? Germany expects, and I'm quoting again from the website, for children over 16 years old, there must be sufficient proof of German language proficiency and the ability to adapt and integrate. What about spouses? As for spouses, they will need to have at least an A1 German proficiency to qualify." There's another example, Switzerland. If a family member applies for Swiss residence permit, the authorities may ask them to sign a cultural integration agreement. The applicants may be asked to show a certain level of language skill. Now, these countries are not looking for proficiency, just functional knowledge of a language. A UK spouse visa requirement includes a minimum English language proficiency of CEFR level A1. CEFR stands for the Common European Framework of References for Language. Now, in case you're wondering, there is no such language requirement in India. If someone wants to migrate to India, India does not expect him or her to have a functional knowledge of Hindi or Bangla or Tamil or any of the official languages in India. Well, if they did, it would only help them. But think about it. Is it too much to ask for to learn a language? It takes 80 to 100 hours of classes, a couple of tests to clear a beginner-level foreign language test, and most of these lessons are now available online. You don't even have to pay for them. It is expected to help the applicant adjust to a new country, be functional if not employable. Australia too is thinking on the same lines. It says there were about 1 million people living in Australia with poor or no English skills. And this has limited their work and social skills. So Canberra wants applicants to take 500 hours of English class, which by the way is free of cost. And Australia is not saying that if you do not know English, you cannot visit your spouse. It says you can still enter the country, stay there temporarily, and only if you want to stay in Australia permanently, you would need to learn English. And you can do that while still being there. What's so controversial here? Countries have every right to frame their immigration policies, set criteria for allowing people in their country and for living there, utilizing their resources, adding to the demand-supply graph. It is only fair that when a country is letting someone in, they expect that person to add value and not just to its population count. Genetically modified wheat. It is drought resistant, easy to grow, more reliable than the traditional variants, but countries are still hesitant to import GM wheat. Consumers still scared of possible health issues. Argentina has bucked the trend though. It has become the first country to approve the use of genetically modified wheat. The question is this: will other countries follow? This next report has all the details.
Countries have long shied away from embracing genetically modified wheat. Will consumers adapt to this new variety? Will foreign nations clear them for import? These are just some of the apprehensions that discouraged governments until now. But Argentina has broken the jinx. It has become the first country to approve genetically modified wheat, specifically the HB4 variant, developed by Bioceres, a company based out of South America. So what makes the HB4 variant special? The most important thing you need to know is that it's drought resistant. By using the HB4, farmers can minimize their losses, ensuring predictability to their yields. So on paper, the HB4 is a clear winner. But genetically modified wheat has always been a polarizing issue. The concern is safety. Countries are wary of possible health issues from consuming modified wheat. This has kept them from clearing GMO wheat variants for import. Bioceres is aware of this challenge, which is why the company is holding back on marketing. It is waiting for clearance from Brazil, which imports almost 45% of Argentina's wheat. The scientific hurdles have been overcome, but the mental barriers remain. With virtually no demand among customers, genetically modified wheat remains a non-starter. But what if it was the only option on the table? It's worth discussing because that's where the world is heading. Climate change is altering landscapes. A new study has found that in the next 80 years, 60% of wheat-producing land will be hit by droughts. China, India and Russia could be the worst hit. These three countries together account for almost 41% of global production and 37% of global consumption. If growing traditional wheat becomes untenable, these genetically modified variants could be the only option. Other crops like soybean and corn have been widely genetically modified. They are imported in large quantities around the world. But wheat's scale of consumption is what's keeping farmers and governments on their toes. If scientists can guarantee the safety of these new variants, regulators will have no trouble approving them for import. From there, it's all up to the consumers. Bureau Report, WION. World is One.
Americans watched a debate last night. Not a commotion, but a debate. The vice presidential debate between Democratic VP pick Kamala Harris and US Vice President Mike Pence. It was civil, to say the least. For some, it was a debate that positioned Kamala Harris as a person who, if given a chance, could serve as America's commander-in-chief and do justice to the post. For others, the 90 minutes positioned Mike Pence as a better alternative to Kamala Harris, whom he branded as overly progressive. So who won? One poll gives Kamala Harris the lead, but opinion polls count for very little, so we will not dwell on them. What I can tell you, though, is that both Harris and Pence successfully touched upon all the election issues. They gave the electorate a clear idea of what they and their respective parties stand for. Harris and Pence spoke about the Wuhan virus, the exporters of the virus, and the Trump administration's handling of it. Kamala Harris called it the greatest failure of any presidential administration. Listen to this.
And they knew what was happening, and they didn't tell you. They knew, and they covered it up. The president said it was a hoax.
The reality is that we're going to have a vaccine, Senator, in record time, in unheard of time, in less than a year.
Half of Americans now say they wouldn't take a vaccine if it was released now. If the Trump administration approves a vaccine before or after the election, should Americans take it, and would you take it?
If the public health professionals, if Dr. Fauci, if the doctors tell us that we should take it, I'll be the first in line to take it. Absolutely. But if Donald Trump tells us that we should take it, I'm not taking it.
We told you yesterday how healthcare will top Kamala Harris's agenda, and we were also talking about whether Kamala Harris would carry forward the question of white supremacists. Guess what she did? Here's what happened.
Last week, the President of the United States took a debate stage in front of 70 million Americans and refused to condemn white supremacists.
Not true.
And
not true.
It wasn't like he didn't have a chance. He didn't do it, and then he doubled down. And then he said, when pressed, stand back, stand by. And this is a part of a pattern of Donald Trump's. He called Mexicans rapists and criminals. He instituted as his first act a Muslim ban.
You're concerned that he doesn't condemn neo-Nazis. President Trump has Jewish grandchildren. His daughter and son-in-law are Jewish. This is a president who respects and cherishes all of the American people.
There was also a heated conversation about abortion rights and the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett as the to the Supreme Court rather. Pence clearly was prepared for this one. He packed his answers with history and numbers and may have won some votes here.
Issues before us couldn't be more serious. There's the issue of choice, and I will always fight for a woman's right to make a decision about her own body. It should be her decision and not that of Donald Trump and the Vice President, Michael Pence.
I couldn't be more proud to serve as Vice President to a president who stands without apology for the sanctity of human life. I'm pro-life. I don't apologize for it. Are you and Joe Biden going to pack the court if Judge Amy Coney Barrett is confirmed? I mean, there have been 29 vacancies on the Supreme Court during presidential election years, from George Washington to Barack Obama. Presidents have nominated in all 29 cases. But your party is actually openly advocating adding seats to the Supreme Court, which has had 9 seats for 150 years, if you don't get your way.
From courts to China, Harris and Pence spoke a great deal about foreign policy. Harris accused Trump of betraying America's friends and befriending dictators like Russian President Vladimir Putin. She also accused the Trump administration of losing a trade war with China. Pence shot back, calling Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden a cheerleader of the Chinese Communist Party.
You lost that trade war. You lost it.
Lost the trade war with China. Joe Biden never fought it. Joe Biden has been a cheerleader for communist China over the last several decades.
Leaders of all of our formerly allied countries have now decided that they hold in greater esteem and respect Xi Jinping, the head of the Chinese Communist Party, than they do Donald Trump, the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief of the United States.
Our armed forces destroyed the ISIS caliphate and took down their leader al-Baghdadi without one American casualty.
Here's my top takeaway from the vice presidential debate. It was not personal. Harris and Pence did not get into Biden's age or Trump's health. They kept it civil. There was an occasional spat or two, especially when the two were debating about race, but none took jibes at each other. As for the response to the debate, 2 things dominated social media. Or 3. A fly, Pence's flushed eye, and Kamala Harris's expressions. We'll focus on the fly. Who won the vice presidential debate? Was it Kamala Harris? Was it Mike Pence? None. A fly won the debate. Harris and Pence might have made their points, but it's a fly that became the talk of the town. A black fly that landed on Mike Pence's white head. Quite a spectacle. Our next report tells you what happened.
That America is systemically racist. And that, as Joe Biden said, that he believes that law enforcement has an implicit bias against minorities is a great insult.
Just look at that timing. Could it have been any worse?
Implicit bias against
U.S. Vice President Mike Pence tries defending racism, and in comes a black fly, plants itself on his white head, steals all the attention, and suddenly everyone is staring at it. The fly.
To the men and women who serve in law enforcement.
What is Pence speaking about? Is it a lie? No one's listening.
But we don't have
it's only the fly.
Law enforcement.
The fly began buzzing online.
Nice. Now, where were we? That was pretty impressive, wasn't it? I got it. I got the second. What do you think, Gibbs?
That is very good. It's on. It's right there.
It's right there. You want to film that? There it is.
The creature sat on Pence's head for a couple of minutes, but like they say, time flies. This one left a mark and a Twitter account. The verdict was out. The fly had won the debate. But who planted it on Pence's head? Was it Antifa? Was it the devil? Or was it the deep state? It definitely helped Joe Biden fly high. The Democratic presidential candidate posted this photo. Pitch in $5 to help this campaign fly. Then came a website, flywillvote.com. Within an hour, Democrats were selling fly swatters, truth over flies, one for $10. Will you buy for the sake of the fly? Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
The COVID-19 pandemic has amplified many other issues plaguing our society. While stay home, stay safe has been the mantra to defeat this virus, for many women, home is where they might be the most unsafe. The lockdowns have led to a rise in domestic violence across the world. In the United States, it's especially bad. The issue is far more serious, with more than 500 domestic violence cases involving guns. Our next report tells you more.
When COVID-19 started wreaking havoc across the world, over half of humanity was locked down. People were asked to stay home to stay safe. But what if your home is where you are the most unsafe? The pandemic has once again put the spotlight on domestic violence across the world. Some women have been locked down with their tormentors for months. The result? A rise in domestic violence cases in the United States. The problem is far more serious. Over 500 domestic violence cases in this year, 2020, involved guns. More than 500 suspects have been charged in domestic violence cases with illegal possession of firearms. The U.S. Justice Department has highlighted the severity of the risks attached. According to the U.S. Attorney General William Barr, the statistics are clear that when domestic violence offenders have access to guns, their partners and their families are at much greater risk of falling victim to gun violence. In fact, in some communities across America, roughly half of the homicides are related to domestic violence. The U.S. Justice Department says domestic violence abusers with a gun in the home are 5 times more likely to kill their partners than those living in gun-free homes. The law prohibits individuals with domestic violence record from possessing or owning guns. But the figures are alarming. According to multiple public opinion surveys, about 40% of Americans say that they or someone in their household has a gun. Data suggests that about 1 in 6 homicide victims are killed by an intimate partner. Nearly half of female homicide victims in the U.S. are killed by a current or former male intimate partner. America has for a long time grappled with gun violence. 38,000 Americans die from gun violence every year. The latest figures have triggered a fresh debate on the issue of firearm-related domestic violence. Women in the U.S. are 21 times more likely to be killed by guns than women in other high-income countries. America's situation is bad, but not unique. Lockdowns have amplified the domestic violence crisis across the world. According to the United Nations, domestic violence reports in France increased 30% since the lockdown. Argentina saw a 25% rise in cases. In India, domestic violence complaints were at a 10-year high during the COVID-19 lockdown. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
The Indian Air Force is celebrating its 88th Foundation Day. The IAF today is almost unrecognizable from its humble origins in 1932. From a small group of about 24 men, it is now a family of around 140,000 active personnel. Our next report traces the journey of the Indian Air Force and the challenges it faces in the decades ahead.
On this day in 1932, the Indian Air Force was established. A supporting fleet to Her Majesty's Royal Air Force. Back then, 6 officers and 19 sepoys constituted the Air Force in India. 88 years later, it has grown into the world's 4th largest air force. 139,576 active personnel, approximately 140,000 reserve personnel, and more than 1,750 aircraft. That is the strength of the Indian Air Force as it celebrates its 88th Foundation Day. As always, the main event was the parade and the fly-past at the Hindon Air Base. India's high-end acquisitions were on display. The MiG-29s, the Sukhois, and the newly inducted Rafale jets. India's Air Force Chief talked about how the new acquisitions have boosted India's air strength.
The recent induction of state-of-the-art Rafale, Chinook, and Apache aircraft have added significantly to our combat capability over our adversaries in the battlefield. Our offensive strike capability has been honed further with upgradations of our aircraft, with weapon systems and sensors, ably supported by a networked decision-making matrix.
The Air Force has given India a decisive edge over its regional rivals. In the 1965 war, the Indian Air Force raided multiple air bases inside Pakistan. Again, in 1971, during the Bangladesh Liberation War, it turned the tide in India's favor. Flying 2,000 sorties over East Pakistan, providing cover to Indian troops. Another landmark operation was the Balakot airstrike. 12 Indian Air Force fighters crossed the line of control. Their target? Jaish-e-Mohammed terror camps in Pakistan's Balakot. The airstrikes were a successful display of the Indian Air Force's covert striking capacity. While the Indian Air Force is undoubtedly a well-oiled war machine, it has also been crucial in humanitarian missions. In 2013, when the northern state of Uttarakhand was ravaged by floods, it was the Indian Air Force that came to the rescue. Under Operation Rahat, as many as 20,000 people were airlifted to safety. The biggest civilian rescue operation ever undertaken by an Air Force. Looking ahead, the Indian Air Force does have its work cut out. Squadron strength is far below the sanctioned requirement of 42. Foreign dependence continues to remain high despite a concerted effort to buy Indian. Indigenization is likely to be the Indian Air Force's biggest challenge in the coming years. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you with Gravitas Images. Thanks for watching.